the OCP Critical Facilities Operations Framework. This webinar will present the process called Site Assistance. We will start with a process overview and its different sub-processes that are included in this. We will look at some lessons learned through customer experience and end with final notes to consider when working with this process. So what is Site Assistance? Site assistance is a specific form of facility management which is performed on site and directly involves the end user organization or the customer organization's equipment and business processes. The process consists of several different types of engagements. And they are split between so-called hard FM and soft FM. They are performed in the critical facility to ensure that the primary area fulfills the expectations and requirements of the end user organization, but also supporting them in handling their equipment. One of the examples of these sub-processes is the manned site or site engineer on site, which means that it's possible to have a 24/7 staffing on site to ensure that everything works well, or perhaps only during office hours, depending on what the needs are. Some customer organizations or site owners have the need for highly skilled and qualified technicians, which means that there would be site engineers specialized in different topics and knowing the technical designs of the site and so forth. Other customers or site owners have more need for a person on site that may not be so technically involved, but is able to escort third parties or validate simple technical alarms and so forth. The other services offered through Site Assistance, that is smart hands or remote hands. It's the services that involve designated personnel that physically touch the customer's equipment and also critical assets according to written or verbal instructions, often with remote connectivity, mobile phone or similar to show with the camera what they're doing. These could typically include power shutdowns or visual inspection of customers' equipment. It may be handling of cables or patching of networks and installation of hardware, also called moves, adds and changes. The next one is third-party escorting. This is to ensure that access is only made to equipment and assets where the individual needs to be. For example, it could be let's say a vendor that needs to get access to a certain product to replace it because it's a highly specialized expert that doesn't necessarily have a general access to the site only for this particular event, and thereby needs a trusted person to follow them to make sure that they end up in the right space and get access to the right technical area. It could also be other rules for on-site works, for example, 2 rules or health and safety requirements. The next one is goods handling, and that is to, again, minimize the number of third parties gaining access to the premises. It's possible to have dedicated staff or a dedicated function, making sure that any goods that is to be received at the site is taken from the supplier or the logistics partner, signing receipts and then unpacking them and making inventory checks and controlling that they're not defect and so forth. And of course the other way around, when goods have to leave the site, they can pack them, making sure that they are documented and see to that the logistics partner is signing for them as they are shipped off. And all the packaging materials and all other things are handled as recycling and disposal. And this also goes for used up technical equipment. It may be servers or other hardware that no longer is in use at the site and needs to be properly treated according to the environmental requirements. There may, of course, be other site assistance services that are specifically agreed between the parties for a certain site or due to certain requirements of a customer. It could be specific site inspections or other types of works that needs to be done. Lessons learned then. Well, one of the customers or the site owners, they had quite a large problem before they outsourced their site management function. And that was before they had the outsourced site management function, they didn't even have a local site technician. So they had no one on site to control what was happening, and they had no one off site that actually had a structured plan and follow-up of the works that were taking place. They simply received invoices from external vendors or did things locally with their own people when they thought it was needed and didn't really document it. So it was a pretty chaotic site. Where all of the on-site providers, they enter the buildings without any escort or permit to work, but they had, of course, access cards, so they were logged that they entered or left the building. The problem was that there was no real access control within the building. Once they were inside the perimeter protection, and they were considered secure. And that meant that no one checked if they followed the health and safety standards, if they documented the changes they made to the site systems, or even if they only accessed the technical areas where they needed to go to fix their things. So the conclusion of this, apart from posing severe risks, not only to health and safety, but also to the site security, since they could move around in the different areas, it also led to technical problems in the environmental control systems, because the settings on the cooling units, they were configured differently between the different units because they had no clearly documented site configuration procedure which stated how they should be configured to gain the best performance across the site. So every technician had used their own settings, and when the next technician came, he or she might have adjusted it according to that person's experience and technical expertise. So this gave very high variation on energy use, which led to fluctuation in costs, but it also gave variations in the environmental controls itself. So both temperature and humidity varied over time, and it wasn't really clearly defined why this happened. It just happened. But when they outsourced the site management function and also introduced a local site technician, these things got stabilized over time, and it saved money, lowered risks, and gave a more comfortable forecasting process of knowing where the costs and technical investments were going to end up in the coming period. Some final notes. The site assistance services can be a lot of different things, and they can be more or less qualified. And this can be a challenge when you have local staff that walk the corridors and work in the site and may be very qualified in some areas but less qualified in others. So they may take on tasks that they shouldn't, or the other way around, they may avoid tasks that they are not feeling comfortable with but that someone else perhaps expected them to do. So it's important to clarify the roles and accountabilities to avoid expectancy gaps when it comes to the roles involved in the site assistance or on-site works. So for example, site engineers, they should be responsible for planning and overseeing on-site works. Sometimes they're called on-site project managers, or they are work leaders, or some other title. But in the OCP framework, they're referred to as site engineers, and they are the local go-to persons and project managers that approve and document when they review the works that have been done. They also check or issue the permit to work and validate that as-built drawings are being updated and so forth. And at the same time, we have the site technician, which is another role, and that is a person that is dedicated to provide remote hand services or to maintain or be the expert of a specific site system or type of site system. That may not necessarily be a project manager or someone that approve other people's work. This is more of a specialized technician. You will find examples of roles and responsibilities in the terms and acronyms list, which is part of the OCP CFOPS framework. And remember, this regards on-site works, so they should always include the updating and finalization of related documentation and service records. For example, if you have remote hands that do a cabling and patching work, of course, this means that the network mapping needs to be updated and the documentation accordingly. Hoping that you will join us in another webinar for the other processes as well.